Here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is letting go. It's something we hear about a lot. Let's talk about what it means and how we can do it. So, before we get started, let's take a minute to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it and imagine clean, crisp oxygen flowing into your lungs, into your bloodstream, into every cell and organ of your body, enlivening and revitalizing you. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, any stress, and maybe roll your shoulders to relax them. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose. This time, imagine sparkling white light lighting up every molecule and electron in your body, and see those electrons and molecules vibrating and connecting with the universe and connecting you to the world beyond. And exhale any remaining stress and tension. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the delicious tingling and tickling sensation, and bring you present right here, right now, in this wonderful body that you experience life through. So letting go. How many times have you been in an upset where you're really, really deeply emotional and somebody says, just let it go, and you want to punch them? Or I maybe that's the reaction, maybe not, hopefully not. And certainly, hopefully you don't do that. But what is this thing about letting go, especially when you're in a deeply emotional state of upset? What actually is going on? And the counterpoint to letting go is attachment, right? And part of attachment is resistance. So let's look at this dynamic and see where it might take us and how we might find an inroad into this letting go process, if indeed we find that it's a useful tool. So um, when we become when we're enmeshed in less resourceful states, what happens so much is that our mind goes in a loop, and it's just a repetitive loop going over and over and over the wrong that we've received, or the violation, the upset, whatever, right? And so what's happening is that we have this loop that we are holding on to. Really, in a pretty literal way, we are recreating it over and over and over and over again. And the resistance comes in allowing things to be as they are, because usually it's shoulda, woulda, coulda stuff that happens in this perpetual loop of attachment or upset. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? By the way, I want to say thank you to everybody for being here and joining me in these conversations. It's awesome to participate in this with you. I'm wondering if you have had the experience of these obsessive thoughts, and the advice to just let it go doesn't really help, because in the midst of that, how do you let go? And what are you letting go of? What does it even mean to let go? And so, um, if we can imagine that these thoughts, when we're in the midst of them, it's like a broken record. It's like a constant loop that we can't seem to find our way out of. One of the ways, and it's sort of a counterpoint to the whole notion of letting go, one of the ways that I have found to be more effective than trying to let go of something. It's like holding something really tight and then trying to let go. It's like it's there's not a way to really do that. For from from the holding on, there needs to be something that says, okay, I'm going to stop holding on to this. And somehow you can't necessarily do that. And then there's judgment about self, not being able to do the thing, do the thing to let go. It's like it's freaking me out. I'm so engaged in it, and I don't know how to let it go. So one of the things that I became aware of a while ago, and I thought it was a little bit of a revelation, was that most of us that would be listening to this broadcast, for example, are Westerners from a Western culture, and Western culture is not about letting go. It's more about acquisition, right? It's more about um, collecting things, right? It's typically, whether we like it or not, it's typically about more, not less. And so, what I stumbled upon that I found really effective and pretty cool was, instead of trying to let go, how about expanding ourselves to include whatever that thing is? Because the repetitive loop is generated by a resistance to the circumstance as it is, right? It's a lack of acceptance of the circumstance as it is. And if we give ourselves the grace to expand our our beingness to include whatever that thing is, then by nature that is going to generate a sense of acceptance, which will enable us to release the intensity of our hold on that thing, which in effect creates a letting go. Kind of an interesting loop around to get there. Maribel, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Maybe we become saturated and have no other option but to let go. So you bring up a really good point, Maribel. And the thing about that is that there may be, and not necessarily, but there may be a sense of resignation around that. And the word surrender comes up, but there are different kinds of surrender. There's surrender that comes from resignation, like I give up. And then there's surrender that comes from connecting to a deeper trust of the universe. And that's I give over. I give over my control of this to a higher power, perhaps, or a greater intelligence or something, versus I give up, I can't do this anymore, and then just letting go. I think that they're very different dynamics, and they create a different experience, radically different experience. One is contractive, I think, and the other is more expansive. Um, Whereas I think that we can access. So yes, so Maribel says faith. So yes, we can let go and let God, kind of. You've heard that expression too, let go and let God. And that's where we say, you know what? I recognize this isn't something I can control, and I'm trusting the greater intelligence to take care of it. And good morning, Danette. Wonderful, wonderful to have you here. Thanks, guys, for being here. I so appreciate not only you being here, but your engagement. It makes a huge difference for me to be able to dialogue with you and share this time more more actively. The Maribel says yes, faith. Yeah. So the surrender is surrender to faith or surrender to giving up, and this idea of um, expanding to include also gives us a greater capacity to move into the wholeness that we are. So, for instance, one of the things that I notice about this dynamic of I'm just going to call it obsession, because it is sort of an obsessive thing that we get into with these loops in our head, right? So when we become embroiled in this sort of obsessive loop, what's happening is we're creating a really small circle. Let's think of it maybe as a small energetic circle. And then we judge ourselves about it, right? So it's like, oh, I'm so upset. I really shouldn't be so upset. I really should be able to let this go. I really should be able to. And then we're compounding this other energy on top of that original energy ball, right? Where if we allow ourselves the notion of expanding our awareness and our presence and our beingness to include this experience without judging it. In other words, to be able to, for instance, embrace the shadow as a part of ourselves, if we can expand to include that, ultimately we're releasing the judgment and the tension around it. We expand to include even the judgment, and we allow ourselves to keep expanding and expanding. And as we do that, we're letting go of the hold on that small thing, and kind of our hand is opening and opening and opening to present or to receive greater and greater possibility. Does this resonate for you guys at all? I'm wondering, the notion of expanding to include, because when one of these big loops that we experience is a loop of self-judgment, and letting go of the judgment isn't something I ever knew how to do. As I was going through periods of extreme self-judgment, I really didn't know how to do it. And so, Maribel, you got the right idea here. She says, if we become an observer of the events, right? So, what we get to do is we get to find a meta position, like an overarching view of of ourselves, of the events, of our reaction. Then we get to have a broader view that may let us let go. Good morning, Isabel. Welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here. So, we're talking about letting go and the challenges around that and the dynamic of attachment and letting go. So, when we think about letting go, the opposite of that, or the counterpoint to that, is attachment. And so, what are we attached to? Maybe we're attached to certain expectations or judgments. And Maribel says, this is what you mean when you say expand, become an observer of the events. Yes, Maribel, to a certain degree, it does mean become an observer. And what it means on a more immediate level is to find an acceptance, to say, to expand to include all things, where we're not resisting those aspects of ourselves that are present. So let's say I behave in a way that I don't particularly like, and I might have judgment about myself. And in the past, certainly, I would be going on and on and on about how I was, how I didn't live up to my own expectations. And then I would be in a loop around that. When we expand to include the aspects of ourselves that we might consider as shadow, when we expand to include them as part of our expression in the world, then rather than judging them, then there's a level of acceptance that allows us to be able to see those things more clearly, because we're not resisting them as an identity of ourselves. And Maribel says, jobs, titles, material things. I'm not sure how that what connection you're making, Maribel. So maybe you can help expand on that a little bit. Expand, right? So here's what's interesting. We're on a journey to wholeness, right? And we like to especially in spiritually minded community, we like to nurture all the wonderful things, all the attributes that we consider or we judge to be wonderful, while, oh, I see what Maribel's saying, that the jobs, titles, material things are the attachments. Yes, Maribel, that's true. And it's not just material things that are attachments. We also have attachments to ideas of who we should be or who we are. You know, we have attachments to certain identities that we've adopted. We have attachments to codes of behavior that we believe are right and righteous. We have attachments to uh, different ideas, and our attachments with these to these different things are often sources of conflict within ourselves and with other people. We look at the political environment right now. We all have, or many of us have, attachments to political views, and when we have conversations with other people who don't have the same who have attachments to different political views, look at what can arise from that, right? So when we expand to include these things rather than resist them, that is a form of letting go of the attachment in a way. It's kind of ironic that by expanding to include the shadow, I lose my attachment to having to fight that shadow. So fighting something is in a way a reinforcement of that thing, right? So if I'm denying my shadow, I can't, by fighting it, I can't really address it, can I? Because I'm trying to deny it and deny it out of existence, rather than facing it directly. And then I have the ability to interact with it in a way that I can heal it. Does that make sense? So I was working with somebody the other day, and the core connection work that I've developed works with moving the energy of blockages that we have, and often that energy is blocked around trauma or pain, right? And so Isabel says, I've been struggling to let go of my attachments. And Danette says, yes, it does make sense. Maribel says, thank you. Good. I'm glad. So let's dig into this a little bit. So and Maribel says, yes, by changing our thoughts. So when we change our thoughts, we get to change our emotions also. There's a really close connection between thought and emotion. And so, for instance, I was working with somebody the other day, and outwardly there was a really powerfully positive persona. And I think that we can cultivate personas that are like armor, and they protect our inner wounds, our inner pain from access, both by others, but also by ourselves. You know, we can armor ourselves with this persona to protect ourselves from others, but we also are often walling ourselves off from ourselves. And what we finally got to a place where we were talking about the real deep wound that was there, because that's what the work does, is address and move the energy that is holding these deep wounds in place so that the experience lifts to create greater freedom. And this person said, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. It hurts to go there. And the pattern for this person was so powerful, to avoid that pain at all costs, that that pain was really being broadcast all the time, without, in an unconscious way, because there was such deep resistance and such deep avoidance of that pain, that it was it, it it was powering this false persona that created even more pain, that fed that pain even more. It is a really interesting dynamic. And so this whole idea, why would we want to let go to begin with, is the things that we want to let go of are typically things that are causing and creating pain. The holding on of those things is what is helping to perpetuate the pain and to lock it in place. So the unfortunate thing is that, why would I, if I knew how to let go, why would I be holding on to that pain? Right? If I knew how to let go, I would let go, right? And so one dynamic that I have discovered, going back, I've said it a couple times, is this idea of expanding to include that pain. And the mechanism that happens as we do that, as we expand to include it. Hello and good afternoon, Hope Wellington Marshall. Great to have you here joining us. Thank you for being here. We're talking about letting go and expanding to include, because as we expand to include something, our resistance to the or our judgment of whatever it is that we're holding on to starts to release. And that little beginning of release, as we expand to include our upset about something and the injustice of something, and we expand to include, what we get to recognize is that the universe contains all of it, that we as individuals contain all of it, that we are not static beings, that we are not all good or all bad, if good and bad even exist, that we are not all light and all dark, that we are all, that we are the macrocosm, that we contain all of it and we experience all of it. And in order to come to our wholeness, we get to recognize and receive and include all of that. And so with that inclusion, do you feel the shift, like the release of the tight holding? Is I'm expanding to include that and include that and include that. And ultimately, what happens if we expand to include everything is we become global consciousness and awareness, right? Because the world is a mixture of all of those things. We are a mixture of all of those things. And so if in the obsessive loop we say, okay, I'm going to include this obsessive loop as part of my experience, and all of a sudden the judgment about being in that obsessive loop is lifted, and then the obsessive loop itself maybe starts to expand or starts to be less obsessive. I've found that to be a really powerful dynamic for myself, and I would hope that it is equally effective for you. You know, just instead of the letting go thing, it's great if you can let go. The first step to letting go is awareness that you're holding on. And, you know, like maybe you can pry your fingers loose one by one while you're holding on. And Isabel says, yes, it feels much better when I stay aware of it. I agree. And that's the first step to any of this, is when we're in an obsessive loop. And I'm just using that as one example of where we might want to let go, quote unquote, let go. When we recognize, oh my gosh, I'm in this obsessive loop, then there's that meta awareness that we talked about earlier, that allows you to say, okay, I'm going to let go. And if you can, great. Or it allows you to say, I'm going to expand to include this. I'm not going to resist this anymore. I'm going to accept it into my experience. And that way there's an expansiveness in feeling. You know, there's an expansiveness in your response to your experience. Like you can even just observe the experience and not be as consumed by it. So you can even recognize, oh wow, there I go again, there's that loop, without judging it, and allowing that to be part of your experience. And that way it loses its hold on you. You may not let it go, but it loses its hold on you, because you're jumping up to another level of awareness and cognition and observation. And that observation, especially if you're allowing this thing to be part of your experience instead of trying to push it away, then then there's a greater freedom available to you in that. So I'm wondering if you have any other comments about this whole thing, and maybe we can expand ourselves to include all the facets of our experience. Because as we do that too, as we expand to include all those aspects, what's a byproduct? Self-acceptance, self-love, self-appreciation. And as a result of self-acceptance, self-love, and self-appreciation, when we accept all those aspects of us ourselves, we're also expanding our capacity to be accepting of others, and to um, be in relationship with others in a whole new way, because we're not resisting the aspects of them. And Maribel says, no more fear. That's beautiful. Yeah, ultimately, as we accept all these aspects and expand to include them, then the fear of all those things dissipates, and we are able to be present to them. When we're able to be present to them, it gives us the capacity to be responsive rather than reactive. So, whatever the process is to get to this place of inclusion and expansion and acceptance and awareness, let's take that path. So Danette says it's all about thoughts. Thoughts create realities. It's true that thoughts create realities. Emotions power those thoughts to create realities as well. So just thinking the thoughts without the engagement of certain emotions is nowhere near as powerful as thinking those thoughts powered by focused emotion. So when I envision a reality, when I think about a reality that I want to bring into being, when I allow myself to experience the emotion of the having of that reality, like the joy of it, the excitement of it, the delight, the gratitude, the appreciation, when I'm able to feel all those things, then that brings greater dimensionality to those thoughts, and it brings them into it powers them into embodiment much more quickly and effectively. um yeah, like that's the magical formula, I think. And Isabel says, exactly, I've been my worst enemy. Now that I'm awakening, yes, well, the truth is, Isabel, and you really nailed it, is we are all our own worst enemies, because we are creating the world that we live in by the projection of our thoughts, by the beliefs that we've generated, by the interpretations of our experiences. So, yeah, as we become more conscious and more aware, we get to redesign our experience and consequently our reality. And that's an interesting thought, actually, is that our experience precedes our reality rather than our reality creating our experience. So we can chew on that a little bit. That's a fun thought to entertain. So I want to thank you guys for being here and playing with me today. This has been such a treat. And I love the engagement. It makes all the difference for me. Danette says, me too, Isabel. Now that I am seeing things differently, I see a lot more clarity. Yes. And with more clarity, we see things differently as well. It's really powerful magic, our perception and the worlds that we spin, the worlds that we create, the realities that we develop, whether consciously or unconsciously. So, and Maribel says it's so important to catch these thoughts in the process and to observe the feelings we attach to them. I agree, Maribel, and I think that that's a wonderful practice, and it is what consciousness is. I mean, sometimes we see ourselves reacting, and then we get to be aware of that, often after the fact. But in that awareness, perhaps we get to make the shifts internally that allow us to respond differently in the future, right? So this has been, again, such a treat. I thank you. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I'm here every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And we broadcast live on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. And I encourage you to check out all the great programming on Enlightened World Network. Really awesome community of heart centered, spiritually oriented folks. And I want to say thank you. And until next time, lots and lots of love. And I hope to see you again here really soon.